The Witch's Dream, A Healer's Way of Knowledge. Forward. The work of Florinda Donner-Grau has a most special significance for me. It is, in fact, in agreement with my own work, and at the same time it deviates from it. Florinda Donner-Grau is my co-worker. We are both involved in the same pursuit. Both of us belong to the world of Don Juan Matus. The difference stems from her being female. In Don Juan's world, males and females go in the same direction, on the same warrior's path, but on opposite sides of the road. Therefore, the views of the same phenomena obtained from those two positions have to be different in detail, but not in flavor. This proximity to Florinda Donner-Grau, under any other circumstance, would unavoidably engender a sense of loyalty rather than one of ruthless examination. But under the premises of the warrior's path, which we both follow, loyalty is expressed only in terms of demanding the best of ourselves. That best, for us, entails total examination of whatever we do. Following Don Juan's teachings, I have applied the warrior's premise of ruthless examination to Florinda Grau's work. I find that for me, there are three different levels, three distinct spheres of appreciation in it. The first is the rich detail of her descriptions and narrative. To me, that detail is ethnography. The minutiae of daily life, which is commonplace in the cultural setting of the characters she describes, is something thoroughly unknown to us. The second has to do with art. I would dare say that an ethnographer should also be a writer. In order to place us vicariously in the ethnographic horizon he or she describes, an ethnographer would have to be more than a social scientist. An ethnographer would have to be an artist. The third is the honesty, simplicity, and directness of the work. It is here, without doubt, where I am most exigent. Florinda Donner-Grau and I have been molded by the same forces. Therefore, her work must conform to a general pattern of striving for excellence. Don Juan has taught us that our work has to be a complete reflection of our lives. I can't help having a warrior's sense of admiration and respect for Florinda Donner-Grau, who in solitude and against terrifying odds has maintained her equanimity, has remained faithful to the warrior's path, and has followed Don Juan's teachings to the letter. Carlos Castaneda. Author's note: the state of Miranda in northeastern Venezuela was populated by Carib and Kiparicoto Indians during pre-Hispanic times. During colonial times, two other racial and cultural groups became prominent there: the Spanish colonizers and the African slaves that the Spaniards brought to work their plantations and mines. The descendants of those Indians, Spaniards, and Africans make up the mixed population that presently inhabits the small hamlets, villages, and towns scattered over the inland and coastal areas. Some of the towns in the state of Miranda are famous for their healers, many of whom are also spiritualists, mediums, and sorcerers. In the mid-70s, I made a trip to Miranda. Being at that time an anthropology student interested in healing practices, I worked with a woman healer. To honor her request for anonymity, I have given her the name Mercedes Peralta, and I have called her town Curmina. As faithfully and accurately as I could, and with the healer's permission, I recorded in a field diary everything about my relation with her, from the moment I came to her house. I also recorded separately what some of her patients told me about themselves. The present work consists of portions of my field diary and the stories of those patients who were selected by Mercedes Peralta herself. The parts taken from my field diary are written in the first person. I have, however, rendered the patient's stories into the third person. This is the only liberty I have taken with the material, other than changing the names and the personal data of the characters of the stories. Part 1, Chapter 1. It began for me with a transcendental event, an event that shaped the course of my life. I met a nawal. He was an Indian from northern Mexico. The Dictionary of the Spanish Royal Academy defines nawal as a Spanish adaptation of a word that means sorcerer or wizard in the Nahuatl language of southern Mexico. Traditional stories of nawals, men of ancient times who possessed extraordinary powers and performed acts that defied the imagination, do exist in modern Mexico. But in an urban or even rural setting today, actual nawals are purely legendary. They seem to live only in folk tales, through hearsay, or in the world of fantasy. The nawal I met, however, was real. There was nothing illusory about him. When I asked him, out of well-meant curiosity, what made him a nawal, he presented a seemingly simple and yet utterly complex idea as an explanation for what he did and what he was. He told me that nawalism begins with two certainties. The certainty that human beings are extraordinary beings living in an extraordinary world, and the certainty that neither men nor the world should ever be taken for granted under any circumstances. From those sweet, simple premises, he said, grows a simple conclusion. Nawalism is at once taking off one mask and wearing another. Nawals take off the mask that makes us see ourselves and the world we live in as ordinary, lusterless, predictable, and repetitious, and put on the second mask, the one that helps us see ourselves and our surroundings for what we really are. Breathtaking events that bloom into transitory existence once and are never to be repeated again. After meeting that unforgettable nawal, I had a moment's hesitation due solely to the fear I felt on examining such an imposing paradigm. I wanted to run away from that nawal and his quest, but I could not do it. Sometime later, I took a drastic step and joined him and his party. But this is not a story about that nawal, although his ideas and his influence bear heavily in everything I do. It is not my task to write about him or even to name him. There are others in his group who do that. When I joined him, he took me to Mexico to meet a strange, striking woman without telling me that she was perhaps the most knowledgeable and influential woman of his group. Her name was Florinda Matos. In spite of her worn, drab clothes, she had the innate elegance of most tall, thin women. Her pale, complexioned face, gaunt and severe, was crowned by braided white hair and highlighted by large, luminous eyes. Her husky voice and her joyful, youthful laughter eased my irrational fear of her. The nawal left me in her charge. The first thing I asked Florinda was whether she was a nawal herself. Smiling rather enigmatically, she further refined the definition of the word. She said, "To be a sorcerer or a wizard or a witch doesn't mean to be a nawal. But any of them can be one if he or she is responsible for and leads a group of men and women involved in a specific quest of knowledge." When I asked her what was that quest, she responded that for those men and women, it was to find the second mask, the one that helps us see ourselves and the world for what we really are, breathtaking events. But this is not the story of Florinda either. Despite the fact that she is the woman who guides me in every act I perform, this is rather the story of one of the many things she made me do. For women, the quest of knowledge is indeed a very curious affair, Florinda once told me. We have to go through strange maneuvers. Why is that so, Florinda? Because women really don't care. I care. You say you care. You really don't. I'm here with you. Doesn't that speak for my caring? No. What happened is that you like the nawal. His personality overwhelms you. I am the same myself. I was overwhelmed by the preceding nawal, the most irresistible sorcerer there was. I admit you are right, but only partially. I do care about the nawal's quest. I don't doubt it, but that's not enough. Women need some specific maneuvers in order to get at the core of themselves. What maneuvers? What core of ourselves are you talking about, Florinda? If there is something inside us that we don't know about, such as hidden resources, unsuspected guts and cunning, or nobility of the spirit in the face of sorrow and pain, it will come out if we are confronted by the unknown while we are alone, without friends, without familiar boundaries, without support. If nothing comes out of us under those circumstances, it's because we have nothing. And before you say you really care for the nawal's quest, you must first find out for yourself whether there is something inside you. I demand that you do that. I don't think I'm any good at being tested, Florinda. My question is, can you live without knowing whether or not you have something hidden inside you? But what if I am one of those who have nothing? If that's the case, then I will have to ask you my second question. Can you go on being in the world you have chosen if you have nothing inside you? Why, of course I can continue to be here. I've already joined you. No, you only think you have chosen my world. To choose the nawal's world is not just a matter of saying you have. You must prove it. How do you think I should go about doing that? I'll give you a suggestion. You don't have to follow it, but if you do, you should go alone to the place where you were born. Nothing could be easier than that. Go there and take your chances, whatever they may be. But your suggestion is impractical. I don't have good feelings about that place. I didn't leave in good standing. So much the better. The odds will be stacked against you. That's why I picked your country. Women don't like to be bothered too much. If they have to bother with things, they go to pieces. Prove to me that you are not that way. What would you suggest I do in that place? Be yourself. Do your work. You said that you want to be an anthropologist. Be one. What could be simpler? Chapter 2. Years later, following Florinda's suggestion, I finally went to Venezuela, the country of my birth. On the surface, I went to gather anthropological data on healing practices. Actually, I was there to carry out, under Florinda's guidance, the maneuvers necessary to discover whether I possessed hidden resources, without which I could not remain in the nawal's world. The agreement that my journey must be a solitary one was nearly drawn out of me by force. With strong words and decisive gestures, Florinda served notice that under no circumstances should I seek counsel from anyone around me during the trip. Knowing that I was in college, she strongly advised me not to use the trappings of academic life while in the field. I should not ask for a grant, have academic supervisors, or even ask my family and friends for help. I should let circumstances dictate the path to follow, once I had taken it. I must plunge into it with the fierceness of women on the warrior's path. I arranged to go to Venezuela on an informal visit. I would see my relatives, I thought, and gather information on any possibility for a future study in cultural anthropology. Florinda praised me for my speed and thoroughness. I thought she was humoring me. There was nothing to praise me for. I mentioned to her that what worried me was her lack of instructions. Again and again, I asked her for more details about my role in Venezuela. As the date of my departure approached, I became increasingly anxious about the outcome of it all. I insisted in no uncertain terms that I needed more specific instructions. We were sitting in wicker chairs, comfortably padded by soft cushions, under the shade of one of the many fruit trees growing in her huge court patio. In her long, unbleached muslin dress, her wide-brimmed hat, fanning herself with a lace fan, she looked like someone from another time. "Forget about specific information," she said impatiently. "It won't do you any good." "It certainly will do me a lot of good," I insisted. "I really don't understand why you're doing this to me, Florinda." "Blame it on the fact that I am in the nawal's world. On the fact that I am a woman and that I belong to a different mood." "Mood? What do you mean by a different mood?" She gazed at me with remote, disinterested eyes. I wish you could hear yourself talking. What mood? She mocked me. Her face expressed tolerant contempt. I don't go for seemingly orderly arrangements of thought and deed. For me, order is different from arranging things neatly. I don't give a damn about stupidity, and I have no patience. That's the mood. That sounds dreadful, Florinda. I was led to believe that in the nawal's world, people are above pettiness and don't behave impatiently. Being in the nawal's world has nothing to do with my impatience, she said, making a humorous, hopeless gesture. You see, I'm impeccably impatient. I really would like to know what it means to be impeccably impatient. It means that I am, for instance, perfectly conscious that you are boring me now with your stupid insistence on having detailed instructions. My impatience tells me that I should stop you. But it is my impeccability that will make you shut up at once. All this boils down to the following. If you persist in asking for details guided only by your bad habit of having everything spelled out, in spite of my telling you to stop, I'll hit you. But I'll never be angry at you or hold it against you. In spite of her serious tone, I had to laugh. Would you really hit me, Florinda? Well, hit me if you have to, I added, seeing her determined face. But I've got to know what I am going to do in Venezuela. I'm going crazy with worry. All right. If you insist on knowing the details I consider important, I'll tell you. I hope you don't understand we're separated by an abyss. I hope you understand we're separated by an abyss, and that abyss can't be bridged by talk. Males can build bridges with their words. Women can't. You're imitating males now. Women have to make the bridge with their acts. We give birth, you know. We make people. I want you to go away so that in aloneness you'll find out what your strengths or weaknesses are. I understand what you say, Florinda, but consider my position. Florinda relented, dismissing the retort that arose to her lips. All right, she said wearily, motioning me to move my chair next to hers. I'm going to give you the details I consider important for your trip. Fortunately for you, they are not the detailed instructions you are after. What you want is for me to tell you exactly what to do in a future situation and when to do it. That's something quite stupid to ask. How can I give you instructions about something that doesn't yet exist? I'll give you instead instructions on how to arrange your thoughts, feelings, and reactions. With that in hand, you'll take care of any eventuality that might arise. Are you really serious, Florinda? I asked, in disbelief. I'm deadly serious, she assured me. Leaning forward in her chair, she went on speaking with a half smile, about to break into a laugh. The first detailed item to consider is taking stock of yourself. You see, in the nawal's world, we must be responsible for our actions. She reminded me that I knew the warrior's path. In the time I had been with her, she said, I had received extensive training in the laborious practical philosophy of the nawal's world. Therefore, any detailed instructions she might give me now would have to be actually a detailed reminder of the warrior's path. In the warrior's path, women don't feel important, she went on, in the tone of someone reciting from memory. Because importance waters down fierceness. In the warrior's path, women are fierce. They remain fiercely impassive under any conditions. They don't demand anything, yet they are willing to give anything of themselves. They fiercely seek a signal from the spirit of things in the form of a kind word, an appropriate gesture. And when they get it, they express their thanks by redoubling their fierceness. In the warrior's path, women don't judge. They fiercely reduce themselves to nothing in order to listen, to watch, so that they can conquer and be humbled by their conquest, or be defeated and be enhanced by their defeat. In the warrior's path, women don't surrender. They may be defeated 1,000 times, but they never surrender. And above all, in the warrior's path, women are free. Unable to interrupt her, I had kept gazing at Florinda. Fascinated though, not quite grasping what she was saying. I felt acute despair when she stopped, as though she had nothing more to tell me. Without quite wanting to, I began crying uncontrollably. I knew that what she had just told me could not help me to resolve my problems. She let me cry for a long time, and then she laughed. "You really are weeping," she said in disbelief. "You are the most heartless, unfeeling person I've ever met," I said between sobs. "You're ready to send me God knows where, and you don't even tell me what I should do." "But I just did," she said, still laughing. "What you just said has no value in a real-life situation," I retorted angrily. "You sounded like a dictator, spouting slogans." Florinda regarded me cheerfully. "You'll be surprised how much use you can get out of those stupid slogans," she said. "But now, let us come to an understanding. I'm not sending you any place. You're a woman in the warrior's path. You're free to do what you wish. You know that. You haven't yet grasped what the nawal's world is all about. I'm not your teacher. I'm not your mentor. I'm not responsible for you. No one but yourself is. The hardest thing to grasp about the nawal's world is that it offers total freedom. But freedom is not free. I took you under my wing because you have a natural ability to see things as they are, to remove yourself from a situation and see the wonder of it all. That's a gift. You were born like that. It takes years for average persons in the nawal's world to remove themselves from their involvement with themselves and be capable of seeing the wonder of it all. Regardless of her praise, I was nearly beyond myself with anxiety. She finally calmed me down by promising that just before my plane left, she would give me the specific detailed information I wanted. I waited in the departure lobby of the airline, but Florinda didn't show up at all. Despondent and filled with self-pity, I gave free rein to my despair and disappointment. With no concern for the curious glances around me, I sat down and wept. I felt lonelier than I ever had felt before. All I could think of was that no one had come to see me off. No one had come to help me with my suitcase. I was used to having relatives and friends see me off. Florinda had warned me that anyone who chose the nawal's world had to be prepared for fierce aloneness. She had made it clear that to her, aloneness did not mean loneliness, but a physical state of solitude. Chapter 3. Never had I realized how sheltered my life had been. In a hotel room in Caracas, alone and without any idea of what to do next, I came to experience firsthand the solitariness Florinda had talked about. All I felt like doing was sitting on the hotel bed and watching TV. I didn't want to touch my suitcase. I even thought of taking the plane back to Los Angeles. My parents were not in Venezuela at the time, and I had been unable to contact my brothers by telephone. Only after tremendous effort did I begin to unpack. Neatly tucked inside a pair of folded slacks, I found a piece of paper with Florinda's handwriting. I read it avidly. Don't worry about details. Details tend to adjust themselves to serve the circumstances if one has conviction. Your plans should be as follows. Pick anything and call that the beginning. Then go and face the beginning. Once you are face to face with the beginning, let it take you wherever it may. I trust that your convictions won't let you pick a capricious beginning. Be realistic and frugal so as to select wisely. Do it now. P.S. Anything would do for a start. Possessed by Florinda's decisiveness, I picked up the phone and dialed the number of an old friend of mine. I was not sure she would still be in Caracas. The polite lady who answered the phone gave me other possible numbers to call because my friend was no longer at that address. I called all of them, for I could no longer stop. The beginning was taking hold of me. Finally, I located a married couple I knew from childhood, my parents' friends. They wanted to see me immediately, but they were going to a wedding in an hour, so they insisted on taking me along. They assured me it was all right. At the wedding, I met an ex-Jesuit priest, who was an amateur anthropologist. We talked for hours on end. I told him of my interest in anthropological studies. As if he had been waiting for me to say a magical word, he began to expound on the controversial value of folk healers and the social role they play in their societies. I had not mentioned healers, or healing in general, as a possible topic for my study, although it was foremost in my mind. Instead of feeling happy that he seemed to be addressing himself to my inner thoughts, I was filled with an apprehension that verged on fear. When he told me that I should not go to the town of Sortis, even though it was purported to be the center of spiritualism in Western Venezuela, I felt genuinely annoyed with him. He seemed to be anticipating me at every turn. It was precisely to that small town that I had planned to go, if nothing else happened. I was just about to excuse myself and leave the party when he said, in quite a loud tone, that I should seriously consider going to the town of Carmina in northern Venezuela, where I could have phenomenal success because the town was a new, true center of spiritualism and healing. I don't know how I know it, but I know you're dying to be with the witches of Carmina, he said in a dry, matter-of-fact tone. He took a piece of paper and drew a map of the region. He gave me exact distances in kilometers from Caracas to the various points in the area where he said spiritualists, sorcerers, witches, and healers lived. He placed special emphasis on one name, Mercedes Peralta. He underlined it, and totally unaware of it, first encircled it, then drew a heavy square around it and boxed it in. She's a spiritualist, a witch, and a healer, he said, smiling at me. Be sure you go and see her, will you? I knew what he was talking about. Under Florinda's guidance, I had met and worked with spiritualists, sorcerers, witches, and healers in northern Mexico and among the Latino population of Southern California. From the very beginning, Florinda classified them. Spiritualists are practitioners who entreat the spirits of saints or devils to intercede for them with a higher order on behalf of their patients. Their function is to get in touch with spirits and interpret their advice. The advice is obtained in meetings during which spirits are called. Sorcerers are witches. Sorcerers and witches are practitioners who affect their patients directly through their knowledge of occult arts. They bring unknown and unpredictable elements to bear on the two kinds of people who come to see them: patients in search of help and clients in search of their witchcraft services. Healers are practitioners who strive exclusively to restore health and well-being. Florinda made sure she added to her classification the possible combinations of all three. In a joking way, but in all seriousness, she claimed that in matters of restoring health I was predisposed to believe that non-Western healing practices were more holistic than Western medicine. She made it clear that I was wrong. Because healing, she said, depended on the practitioner and not on a body of knowledge. She maintained that there was no such thing as a non-Western healing practices. Since healing, unlike medicine, was not a formalized discipline. She used to tease that in my own way. I was as prejudiced as those who believe that if a patient is cured by means of medicinal plants, massages, or incantations, either the disease was psychosomatic or the cure was the result of a lucky accident that the practitioner did not understand. Florinda was convinced that a person who successfully restored health, whether a doctor or a folk healer, was someone who could alter the body's fundamental feelings about itself and its link with the world. That is, someone who offered the body, as well as the mind, new possibilities so that the habitual mold to which body and mind had learned to conform could be systematically broken down. Other dimensions of awareness would then become accessible, and the common sense expectations of disease and health could become transformed as new bodily meanings became crystallized. Florinda had laughed when I expressed genuine surprise upon hearing such thoughts, which were revolutionary to me at the time. She told me that everything she said stemmed from the knowledge she shared with her companions in the nawal's world. Having followed the instructions in Florinda's note, I let the situation guide me. I let it develop with minimal interference on my part. I felt I had to go to Carmina and look up the woman that the ex-Jesuit priest had talked about. When I first arrived at Mercedes Peralta's house, I did not have to wait long in the shadowy corridor before a voice called me from behind the curtain, directly in front of me, that served as a door. I climbed the 2 steps leading to a large, dimly lit room that smelled of cigar smoke and ammonia. Several candles burning on a massive altar that stood against the far wall illuminated the figurines and pictures of saints arranged around the blue-robed Virgin of Koromoto. It was a finely carved statue with red smiling lips, rouged cheeks, and eyes that seemed to fix me with a benign, forgiving gaze. I stepped closer. In the corner, almost hidden between the altar and a high rectangular table, sat Mercedes Peralta. She appeared to be asleep, with her head resting against the back of her chair, her eyes closed. She looked extremely old. I had never seen such a face. Even in its restful immobility, it revealed a frightening strength. The glow of the candles, rather than softening her sharply chiseled features, only accentuated the determination etched in the network of wrinkles. Slowly, she opened her eyes. They were large and almond-shaped. The whites of her eyes were slightly discolored. At first, her eyes were almost blank, but then they became alive and stared at me with the unnerving directness of a child. Seconds passed, and gradually, under her unwavering gaze, which was neither friendly nor unfriendly, I began to feel uncomfortable. "Good afternoon, Doña Mercedes." I greeted her before I started to lose all my courage and run out of the house. "My name is Florinda Donner, and I'm going to be very direct so as not to waste your valuable time." She blinked repeatedly, adjusting her eyes to look at me. "I've come to Venezuela to study healing methods," I went on, gaining confidence. "I study at a university in the United States, but I truly would like to be a healer. I can pay you if you take me as your student. But even if you don't take me as your student, I can pay you for any information you would give me." The old woman did not say a word. She motioned me to sit down on a stool, then rose and gazed at a metal instrument on the table. There was a comical expression on her face as she turned to look at me. "What is that apparatus?" I asked, daringly. "It's a nautical compass," she said casually. "It tells me all kinds of things." She picked it up and placed it on the topmost shelf of a glass cabinet that stood against the opposite wall. Apparently struck by a funny thought, she began to laugh. "I'm going to make something clear to you right now," she said. "Yes, I'll give you all kinds of information about healing. Not because you ask me, but because you're lucky. I already know that for sure. What I don't know is if you're strong as well." The old woman was silent. Then she spoke again in a forced whisper, without looking at me, her attention on something inside the glass cabinet. "Luck and strength are all that count in everything," she said. "I knew the night I saw you by the plaza that you were lucky and that you were looking for me." "I don't understand what you're talking about," I said. Mercedes Peralta turned to face me, then laughed in such a discordant manner that I felt certain she was mad. She opened her mouth so wide I could see the few molars she still had left. She stopped abruptly, sat on her chair, and insisted that she had seen me exactly 2 weeks ago, late at night, in the plaza. She had been with a friend, she explained, who was driving her home from a séance that had taken place in one of the coastal towns. Although her friend had been baffled to see me alone so late at night, she herself had not been in the least surprised. "You reminded me instantly of someone I once knew," she said. "It was past midnight. You smiled at me." I did not remember seeing her or being alone in the plaza at that hour. But it could have been that she had seen me the night I had arrived from Caracas. After waiting in vain for the week-long rain to stop, I had finally risked the drive from Caracas to Carmina. I knew full well that there would be landslides. It turned out that instead of the usual 2 hours, the drive took me 4. By the time I had arrived, the whole town was asleep, and I had trouble finding the hostel near the plaza, which had also been recommended to me by the former priest. Mystified by her insistence that she knew I was coming to see her, I told her about him and what he had said to me at the wedding in Caracas. He was quite insistent that I look you up, I said. He mentioned that your ancestors were sorcerers and healers, famous during colonial times, and that they were persecuted by the Holy Inquisition. A flicker of surprise widened her eyes slightly. Did you know that in those days accused witches were sent to Cartagena in Colombia to be tried? She asked, and immediately went on to say, Venezuela wasn't important enough to have an inquisitorial tribunal. She paused, and looking straight into my eyes, asked, where had you originally planned to study healing methods? In the state of Yaracuy, I said vaguely. Sortes? She inquired. Maria Leonza? I nodded. Sortes is the town where the cult of Maria Leonza is centered. Said to have been born of an Indian princess and a Spanish conquistador, Maria Leonza is purported to have had supernatural powers. Today, she is revered by thousands in Venezuela as a saintly, miraculous woman. But I took the ex-priest's advice and came to Carmina instead, I said. I've already talked with 2 women healers. Both agreed that you're the most knowledgeable, the only one who could explain healing matters to me. I talked about the methods I wanted to follow, making it all up on the spur of the moment. Direct observation and participation in some of the healing sessions while tape recording them, and, most important of all, systematic interviewing of the patients I observed. The old woman nodded, giggling from time to time. To my great surprise, she was totally amenable to my proposed methods. She proudly informed me that years ago she had been interviewed by a psychologist from a university in Caracas, who had stayed for a week right there in her house. To make it easier for you, she suggested, you can come and live with us. We have plenty of room in the house. I accepted her invitation, but told her that I had planned to stay for at least 6 months in the area. She seemed unperturbed. As far as she was concerned, I could stay for years. I'm glad you're here, Musuya, she added softly. I smiled. Although born and raised in Venezuela, I have been called a Musiyua all my life. It is usually a derogatory term, but depending on the tone in which it is said, it can be turned into a rather affectionate expression, referring to anyone who is blonde and blue-eyed.